recently there was a court case out of Australia that I put into the EMDR News site and various things, and birth trauma was one of the things that we have information on. All right, everybody, welcome to EMDR News with Dr. Tim Vermillion, and I'm glad to be here again today. Not feeling 100%, but I'm doing my best. So happy Friday. Didn't get much sleep last night, unfortunately, but what are you going to do? So I'm really, again, always happy to be here working with you and bringing you research news on mental health, PTSD, and EMDR. And yeah, I do talk about everybody and talk about a little bit about everything, but in the end, I also really focus on veterans and what's happening with veterans. And with that in mind, I did post on EMDR News, or repost, I should say, the National Center for PTSD's decision guide for PTSD when working with your veterans and your clients. It can work for veterans as well as any other client, but it is from the VA, the National Center for PTSD. Also, they have the consultation program. If you didn't know about that, the consultation program is pretty good. They have two EMDR specific consultants that they work with, and I know one of them really well. Yeah. So reach out if you are working with veterans, right? You do not have to be working within the VA in order to get that free consultation for your PTSD clients. And again, PTSD clients is the key there. So if if you have a veteran, even if you're not in the VA, they're suffering from PTSD, go use those VA resources. They're free to you. They also have a monthly course, a continuing education course for about an hour, the presentation that is also free. So if you want to go and look at what's next, um, I can't remember what's next, but the July 15th, that was for anger. So they had one on working with anger. So they have a presenter come in, you sign up for it in advance. And just so you know, if you are going to sign up for the CEUs, it has to be in advance because that's how they do the CEU piece, right? They have to make sure that they have all their ducks in a row in order to make that happen for you. So the National Center for PTSD is a huge resource for people working with veterans and also anybody else working with PTSD. There's a lot of good information in there. So they have the consultation program, so that you can call them and set up a consultation with somebody that will actually go through and talk about your specific issue and your specific client. So please, again, valuable resource available to you. Yeah, so hopefully that'll go out there. So we are doing the newsletter. You know, I've had really good. I'm surprised. I'm happy. I guess I shouldn't say surprised, but I'm happy that I've gotten such good responses from the EMDR newsletter, the EMDR News newsletter. So that should be going out very shortly if it hasn't already gotten out. So I'm going to check that right after our broadcast today, making sure, yes, that it is either out or going out very shortly. This would be our fourth one. So if you're missing out, uh, you know, go ahead and sign up for it. Right now, again, it's free and it brings you good information and helps to consolidate the stuff that you're dealing with in terms of or consolidate the stuff that I'm putting on EMDR News. So if you haven't been on the website, if you're too don't want to go through it, a little TLDR, too long didn't read, and try to figure out where things are, that could bring some of those things that are of interest to the fore for you, so that you can look around and poke around in a smaller container, so to speak. All right, so the news letter should be coming out, so that'll be helpful. Other things, again, if things aren't posted that I've talked about, they are going to be posted, right? Things are slacking over there in the editorial department, so I got to go get them working over there. Make sure the things that they say are going to be posted will be posted. If you see any problems, let me know. If you find anything that you want to know more about, if you have any questions, please, please, please ask questions. Please come to me, come to us, send a email to info@emdrnews.com, and let us know what's up, right? Because we want to make sure that this is a valuable resource for you. I also do take some of the pieces of these presentations. You'll see them pop up in different places. Uh, Sometimes those little kernels are more helpful than going through the whole process of listening to the live or something like that. So you're going to be able to kind of see these things in different ways, in different places, parsed in a way that is more digestible for you and your learning needs. All right. So things that we've been talking about in terms of research and how important research is, and specific research, especially that is able to be generalizable. One of the interesting that happens periodically is that a research study will be retracted, right? So there was one in that presentation that I did yesterday on the depression and anxiety. Of the 40 sessions, 40 research papers that were out there, one of them was actually retracted. So what that does is, depending on how much information that um, specific study provided in terms of benefit and all of that, that would end up changing hopefully a little bit, because there's 40 studies and that was just one. Hopefully just a little bit of how generalizable and how much we can trust the results of a 40 study meta-analysis if you start pulling those studies out, right? And that happens a lot of times. I'm a peer reviewer for Springer I think it's Springer, for Springer Publishing, or one of them anyway. They send us stuff. We suggest corrections, and then the authors go back and do those corrections, and then they come back to us, and it's a back and forth thing, and before things even get published, right? So with that in mind, looking at a study right now that was supposed to be posted, but again, got pulled back because there's certain things that are um, not helpful in terms of trying to get a study that is worth reading. When I say worth reading, I mean that study has the methodological things that's within it are sound, right? That the methodology is sound. My goodness. Um, yes, that we want a good studies, right, with good methodology, so that we can rely on the results, and we know that the results, the study is studying the things that we want it to, right? So when the conclusions come out, they actually match what we are looking for. Um, yeah, so a lot of information that comes out in research, and that's what I want to do. I want to bring that to you through EMDR News, and I've been looking at other sources where I can pull down some studies. Some of them are maybe not even that recent. Like there's one from a couple of years ago on personality and EMDR. And when I'm doing trainings, I get questions like that all the time. So last time I did a training 2 weeks ago or so, that was a specific question. Can you do this on personality disorders? And the short answer is yes. Of course, you can do this on personality disorders. And I brought up Judith Herman and her work on trauma and recovery, the book Trauma and Recovery, and how historically there has been a debate on whether personality disorders are really just some way of expressing trauma. It could be trauma-related disorders, and not just some type of unfortunate mental health disorder that you can't find your way out of. In that context, it changes how we see people and how we treat them, and on some level, how much hope we can have for their recovery in some way, shape, or form. What would that look like for them? So I know I keep pushing the research thing. Research, right? We don't know what we're doing. So be it. And research does include those case studies. I say there's like a buildup. Hey, I saw this thing and it seemed to work, right? I did a N of one study, which is like a case study. Like trying to figure out what's going on. I did another one. I did, maybe a couple of case studies that are showing the same thing, and it's like, right? Maybe we can get a randomized control trial study, the gold standard, right? And research and generalizability. Maybe we can get one of those going. So there is a process of this whole thing, and you go into journals and stuff, and you'll see some N of one studies because that's how things start. That's how EMDR started, as far as we know, right? There's some debate on the origin story, right? At the walk in the park. Regardless, right, of how that story goes and whether or not there's validity to it. Again, that's the debate, or that's a part of the debate, I suppose. But in the end, that type of thing is what we look for, right? We say, this is an interesting thing that I'm noticing. Let me go test it on a couple people, and then once we say, I think I have something here, like Eureka. We start moving that out to other places and trying to get more larger studies going so that we can increase the generalizability of the things that we're exploring. I'm going to stop talking about research as much all the time. I'm going to hopefully just like point to something that says, hey, this is my thoughts on research, because you might not be here for just talking about research, or just tell me the research, right? So again, there's lots of stuff out there. There's that feasibility study on borderline and borderline clients working through DBT and EMDR. That personality disorder study that I just mentioned is in there. There's some stuff on eating disorders. A lot of stuff on youth. I think there's one right now. Let me see. I'm looking over here, but it's not in front of me. So let me go see if I. Um, Nope, I don't have it in front of me. Okay, so I saw one recently that was kids again, right? Kids and substance abuse and EMDR. And there's just tons of information out there on EMDR, working with in different contexts with different populations. And then we also have the populations themselves. What is like moral injury and that kind of thing. Not necessarily one of those things that can tell you if it's working, but more of a thinking type study. McLeish, uh, McLeish, Kenneth McLeish, I think. His father is like, one of his relatives, I believe, was Archibald McLeish, who's a bigger name in the past in terms of being an author. But Ken does work on moral injury, and so it's not necessarily telling you exactly how things are expected to go with a certain treatment, but it talks about moral injury, what it is, because there's different contexts and different ideas and how moral injury can present itself. And it's really interesting how he does it, because when he talks about moral injury, it's more of a systemic thing at times, right? So you as the soldier, you as the person going to war, for example, are on some level holding the morals of the larger government, the people outside of them, right? So they're not necessarily your morals. You're kind of relying on other people's morals, and people saying, yes, this is good, go do it. It's not necessarily your morals, right? So there's some kind of levels there. And, he gets into what that could mean and how people can overcome some of that moral injury based on how we can look at things a little bit differently in that context. So those types of thinking type stories are also things that I want to bring to you. If someday, you search for children and alcohol, and then you come here and see, this is a good place where you can find that information. That's what I want. That's my goal for you. Let's see. So we talked about some of the stuff that will be posted today. Oh, I think that's where I was looking. Hold on. I don't want to go completely off screen here. So pull back. All right. So let me go ahead. I was looking at the what they were going to be working on today. So let me see if I can pull that back up. the editorial stuff. So VA, there's some revisions that we're going to be doing. We're going to do the COPE-A study, which is the children with these substance abuse. It's a N of 55, which means that there's 55 people within that study, and they're doing a active comparator trial and talking about like how PTSD is improving or not improving. And this one is related to not necessarily EMDR, but working with a substance use difference. So again, sometimes I'm not talking about specifically EMDR. And then there's the MDRAA deadline for the presentation abstracts for July 31st. And in terms of the EMDRIA stuff, I had mentioned before that you're going to be losing access to the summit materials by the 31st. So the 31st is kind of a big day. VA clinical resource hubs will also be kind of touching on that. So there's a couple things they're going to be talking about. I always want to have at least one EMDR thing, if not more, while I also want to kind of expand things so that we know what's going on in the greater world. All right. All right, there we go. Back to where I want to be. All right, so in terms of EMDR stuff, we can also touch on EMDR stuff today. I love doing that. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. All right, so some of the questions that I get are on the personality disorders was a recent one, but changing in BLS. How many sessions should a session take? The simple, obvious questions that a lot of people might have, and I figured that I would kind of have a conversation about a little bit more about working memory, and then working on how many sessions that a memory can take, and then maybe a little bit more about guilt and shame, because I like to talk about those subjects. Okay, so let's do how many sessions. So when you're thinking about EMDR and the memories that you're working on, we usually have a map, right? We usually sit there and do a good targeted identification worksheet, or however you have learned to gather the memories within the memory network that you're going to be working on, right? You usually have a good idea, a good lay of the land, an idea of which memories you're going to work on. If you can work chronologically, that works best if we can do that, right? If we can work from the past to the present, again, depending on our clients and our settings and the time that we have, that doesn't always work out the way that we would hope it would. So when we are looking at the question, how many sessions, it could depend very largely on where we have decided to start, because there might be blocking beliefs and feeder memories and all sorts of things that pop up if we're not doing this chronologically, and all other things considered. So when we are talking about getting into that memory, some things that we want, some things that we want to do is to make sure that we do our phase 8. Phase 8 is the most underused phase. And even a couple days ago, when I was doing a consultation, somebody, a new person, right? They're only halfway through their training, so it's appropriate to have these questions. But they're like, I didn't know how to stop the session, right? So we had to talk about phase 7, right? And then we talked about phase 8. Both of these things are taught in that first training, and they're just things that people can move out of, or forget, or something like that. But EMDR is pretty structured in that it gives you a path on what to do in most any given situations. The EMDR that I provide and teach, I usually call it my no wrong door EMDR. EMDR is so flexible within the context of the standard protocol that you can do EMDR, and if something pops up, move right into it without a blink, right? It's just again, it's a learning curve. 100%, and that's an issue and a promise. But at the same time, um, in terms of what we're looking at, there's always a way to move through something. So EMDR phase 8, which again is one that people probably could do some better work on learning, practicing, etc., is what can help us move through that idea of where we are, trying to figure out where we are within that memory. Because it's not the memory at the end of the session, that first session or the second session you're working on it, but the work they did between and what they're bringing to that next session that kind of helps us figure out where we are. My opinion, and this is just the start, right? This is just a, hey, take a look at this, is 4 sessions, right? So if I go through a memory and, on the first session, it doesn't seem like it's going where I need it to go or where we expect it to go, it doesn't seem like it's moving, or it is moving, right? And seems like it's going fine, right? Maybe the first session, I don't, at the end of the first session, I'm not fretting. I'm like, okay, it's only one session. We'll see what happens. The second session, like, oh, good, maybe there's some progress going here, right? But it doesn't seem like we're coming to the point where all our chains of association have been exhausted, where we can be able to reprocess our chains of association until each of them become cleared and no longer distressing and have no significant material that needs to be further processed. Then we want to look at, okay, we're not there yet. Things are moving. It seems like there's more work. There's more change of associations that might have been activated. Fantastic. That's part of the work. Now we're on our third session. Like, okay. Hopefully this one, will get us where we need to go. So we get through our third session and we're like, okay, next session, our fourth session, we're going to kind of look at this and try to figure out where we're stuck. So in that phase 8, we're looking at how are we doing in terms of our global plan, our goals? Are we meeting them? Are we moving towards them? Do the people notice change in the problem that they brought to therapy, right? So that's global. That's the first part of phase 8. What's going on? And depending on who you are and who your client is, you can guide that to be longer or shorter, however you think it would be helpful. So taking a break, taking a step back. So right now, I just want to remind everybody that we're here 9:30 in the morning each morning for you, weekdays, except Fridays, because usually I'm doing something else. But I try to be here on Fridays if I can, hence here I am. So most weekdays that I can get here at 9:30 is the goal. So please share, get more people on here, ask questions, make this presentation work for you, make this live stream work for you. Okay, so you can find me on almost all the socials, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, not live, but you'll see things pop up there in terms of the little clips that are made through here. So go ahead right now and take a second if you haven't done it already, and and become a follower of EMDR News on Facebook, especially because that's where I'm going to be doing most of my start on the conversation. But also LinkedIn, if you can get to that one too. I'm actually going to present in multiple areas like I'm doing today. And so once I have enough followers in those areas, then I'll be able to present to them. Okay. So go ahead and, at EMDR News is what we're hoping that we can find both on LinkedIn and Facebook. All right. So getting back into that subject of how many sessions, right? So we are at our third session. Things are moving, right? Maybe they're not stuck. Maybe we have to work through some stuff, whatever it might be. So be it, right? Because we're not in a rush per se, in terms of the work that we're doing. We're trying to get the person to meet their goals and have EMDR do what it does, right? And let the process happen. So we're on our fourth session. And now we're going to be like, okay, well, what's happening here, right? If you're on your fourth session and things are still moving, and this was, a complex client and a difficult memory, so be it. But on this fourth session, if you haven't figured it out already, this is where you're going to sit here and be like, huh, is there something going on? Is there something that I'm not paying attention to, not attending to? Or is there some reason why we haven't moved forward to clear this memory? So there's a couple different things that could be happening, and one happens so often that I have to bring it up, right? So when people are doing EMDR, a lot of times the memory that we start with is desensitized. It's cleared. I mean, you might not have gotten through phase 5 and phase 6, but it's a 0, right? It's the subjective unit of distress is a 0. But we don't know that because we're not asking the right questions, or we're too stuck on some of the ideas behind EMDR not to realize that, hey, EMDR did its thing already. So what happens with a lot of people is once you start to shrink a disturbing memory, then their mind's going somewhere else, right? Maybe something related, but not the memory that you're working on. So that memory that you're working on kind of gets lost, right? It gets like put on the back burner, and now you're talking about all sorts of other things, and people get confused because why? What happens with EMDR, like the standard protocol? What do we tell people? Let your mind go wherever it wants to go. There's no supposed to's in the process. Let whatever happens happen. So we expect their mind to jump around, right? Last session we talked about is it okay if our mind wanders, right? This is connected to that idea. We expect it to wander. So the problem is that we start with a memory and we don't recognize that it's not really wandering anymore. Now it's just looking for something else that has distress. And it's starting to work on that stuff, right? Because this other memory no longer bothers them. And it's not something that is immediately kind of known because you might be in the same context of the memory, because it might be more than one. So if you are had a military person once that had a soldier pass away under his watch, and so we have the memory of learning about that, but of which was processed pretty quickly, but also of seeing the aftermath, right? And that was the more distressing part. But then they have a memory of sitting in front of people that they have to go to and get scolded by, right? So with that in mind, and this probably reaches out to so many people. That's why it's kind of a global thing for leaders that have lost somebody, that they have to have some version of this. So then they have to kind of stand on the carpet, stand in front of people that are going to judge the work that you're doing. So if you started with the accident, the uh, most traumatic part, and now you're talking about something else, right? Now you're talking about what happened after. You're talking to family, talking about something like that. And every time you go back to the memory, they say, it's an 8, it's a 9. And say, okay, go with that or whatever. What's coming up, the way the family was, the way the family looked at me, the way that my bosses looked at me, my leaders looked at me, the way that what they said, um, basically, anytime you go back to that, they're not talking about the memory anymore, right? They just jump to something else. Yes, we could check for dissociation. We can check for, other issues related to why they're not going to that memory. But at the same time, one of the things that is very commonly happening in these cases is that people are done that memory, and that's why they're not staying on it. So we come back and we really focus on that memory for a moment and say, okay, like I understand that there's other things that have happened. We haven't gotten to those memories yet. We're going to get to those memories, I promise. Well, the intent is to get to those memories, and we'll discuss if we need to process them once we get there, right? Because just a reminder that if we have some generalization, sometimes when we get to these other memories, they're like, yeah, that one doesn't bother me anymore, right? Because the stuff that we learned on the memory that we're working on can generalize to other memories within the memory network. That's the hope with EMDR news, or with EMDR, sorry. So, we have to kind of refocus and be like, okay, so what are we talking about when we're going back to this memory? Are we talking about this memory? Are we talking about other memories, feelings that they have about themselves now? And yesterday I had a client that's one of the conversations. They're like, yeah, but that made me feel right into the future, right? I'm like, okay, I understand. We're going to get to present triggers. We're going to get the future templates. We're going to get to other more recent memories. But when you're just focusing on this memory, what's coming up, and I'm like, huh, not much. I can't bring it up. It's distant. It's quiet. Um, Nothing's, I don't feel anything when it doesn't bother me. I can still see it, but it doesn't bother me, right? All of these things are things that you might hear when you go back to that specific memory, right? And then you'd be like, okay, so and you can use their words. So just that memory, when you bring it up now on a scale where it's neutral or doesn't bother me, and 10 is the worst you can imagine. Probably should go to the hospital. I'm so overwhelmed. I just can't take it. How disturbing is this memory to you right now? Right. And you use their language because they brought it up. Right. So it doesn't bother me. I don't feel it anymore. Right. So if that's what a neutral is, and it's not about them thinking that the memory is good in any type of way. The memory can still be bad, but right now that's not bothering me. Right. So use their words. So and they're like, oh, well, I guess it's a 1 or a 2, right? You can keep it at a 1 or a 2 if the next phrase is, if you ask them, okay, well, why a 1? Say, well, I don't believe that anything can be perfect. I was taught that, or whatever it is. If that's the reason, so be it, right? Like, okay, we can, so here's another trick for you. So you can be like, so a 1 is a 0 for you. And they're like, yes. I'm like, okay. So, and you can move forward with that 1 with them, right? The ecological valid ones are very, very like rare, right? So that's one of them, where they can't imagine something being perfect. There are there's some other ways that ecological valid happens, but 9 times out of 10, and I mean that, like, there's really rare times when you have to accept an ecologically valid issue, ecologically valid number. If you ask the question and they about what that is, usually it's about the future, right? Well, I can get into a car accident again, and I have had that one, right? I can get into a car accident again in the future, and I have to feel like I'm always ready. I appreciate that, and we'll keep working on that as we move forward. But right now, let's just focus on this memory, and like leaving all that other stuff that we haven't gotten to yet aside, because we haven't gotten to it yet. So of course you're going to have some disturbance related to it. That would make sense. But when we're just going back to that memory, what do you notice? Oh, well, that's a 0. Okay. All right, and then you go into your phase 5 and your phase 6. And remember, phase 5 and phase 6 are reprocessing phases. So if there is something that is still stuck or left over, or you're not right in your assumption that, hey, we probably moved on and we just haven't recognized it, right? If that's where that stuff can come back up, right? And that's perfectly okay and perfectly fine, but at least you know where you are. Right. At least when you say, why am I, 4 sessions in, and it seems like this is nowhere, or this is just going to keep going. And, that's when we're going to be able to kind of recognize, hey, we probably left. Let's go back to that memory, and we can move it along, and that memory specifically. So how many sessions? Having said that, it still could be 6, 7, 8. You could be working on the same memory for a long time. Generally, it doesn't happen. Okay, for a long time. Right? Generally, it doesn't happen. There are some complex cases. There are some really, really significant memories, and they can take for however long they're going to take. Right, but in terms of one single memory, those memories, uh, are generally within 4 sessions. If you don't know where you are, then there's some work that you can explore and review. And it might be 5 or 6 sessions. Again, might be more sessions, and that's fine. It's just on that 4th session, you're going to be like, okay, well, what's happening here, right? If nothing's happening, so be it. Keep moving. 5 sessions, 6 sessions, so be it. But every once in a while, you want to go back and check, what am I actually reprocessing here? Thank you for listening to me go on about that. That's a huge thing that people end up having a problem with. It's a huge thing that I get consultees coming to me with. And it's always like, okay, well, are we still reprocessing the thing that or that memory that we started reprocessing? Or are we looking back at our pile of other memories and getting lost in them? All right. And you still have time. And I put down here that just talking about bilateral stimulation. And and why we change bilateral stimulation. And this was a client question, right? Like, okay, why does this happen? Why does this work when we just change the direction of our eyes or move from our eyes to our hands? Or in the case of some consultees, they noticed that, well, I moved from doing it on the computer, having a ball go across the screen, to actually having a light bar, right? What's the difference between a screen and a light bar? I mean, set up correctly and having the same, dimensions or so. Nothing really, right? Nothing at all, It's the same light that can go across the screen. If it's the same width, then it's the same width. So what's the difference? It's literally something different, and that's the difference. So the thing with the BLS and working memory is your brain can get bored and used to something. And so when you're saying, hey, I need you to hold this trauma in your mind, and I need you to, look at this stimulation. If you say that over and over again, nothing, and they're going to get used to it. Like, okay, here's that ball going back and forth. Right. So when we were talking about changing direction, doing your mechanical strategies to get them starting to reprocess again, right? That's what we're doing. So if we're changing our BLS to be diagonal from horizontal, great, fantastic. But you can also just have it changed from smooth sailing, going back and forth, the scanning, to blinking on one side of the screen or blinking in corners, right? So basically, you're just changing that novel stimulus, and you don't have to do it forever. So if you did diagonal, you can go back to horizontal and within a couple sets, because again, we're just having that new novel stimulus be able to challenge the person's working memory and the ability to maintain that attention on both the working memory, the BLS working memory piece, and the trauma that they're working on. So the same thing, if you recognize that the client, seems to be processing okay on the computer, and then all of a sudden you're just given a new stimulus of having the light bar, then again, just a new stimulus. It's a new color, new light bar, new situation, right? So it might actually not be the fact that you moved from one thing to the other, but it's just what moving from one thing to the other does. So if you went back to the screen again, you might again still have some movement after working on the light bar for a little while. And that goes along with tapping and everything else, right? So if somebody needs to move from doing bilateral stimulation with their eyes to tapping, so be it. Always remember that you have the opportunity to go back, right? It's not like you're putting yourself in a place where you chose a method of bilateral stimulation and you must stay with it forever, right? Again, our mechanical strategies say that we can help people move forward if we alter them when necessary. Yeah, so one of the cool things that I set up on the BLS tool that I provide, right, is you can have, and other ones have this too, mind you, but you can change the color of the ball of the stimulus, and it can rotate as your eyes go back and forth, right? So that simple thing of having the color rotate can keep the attention a little bit more, right? And that's anecdotal. I don't think there's no study on changing the color. Anyway, but it's anecdotal, right? So there's something interesting to be curious about when you change the BLS a little bit, with that color piece. Just a reminder, I haven't used it yet. I've tested it like once or twice, but I haven't actually used it on a client yet. So if you have used the BLS tool and used the camera portion, the video piece, let me know how that worked, because I need to know how to fix it to make it more appropriate and better for the work that you're doing. Yeah. Anything else that I want? I know I had mentioned talking more about guilt, because I love working with guilt and shame. Um, and I'm afraid that, when we have these conversations, that I bring it up too often, and oftentimes, basically say the same thing. So the working with guilt is awesome, right? One of the things that I would like to tell you, that when you work with guilt, you want to let people have guilt. You want to let them have their shame on some level, right? To an extent. So when I say the shame piece, some people have that, the shame piece because they did something wrong that went way across their values, and you saying, well, you shouldn't feel that way or something along those lines isn't going to be helpful when those things that happened were against their values, right? So a lot of shame work is about looking forward and how you can change your experience and change things to act towards your values and purpose moving forward, because you can't change what happened in the past. And how you view it, we can give you your responsibility. We can give you, hey, yeah, well, that happened. We can give you some of that. And that's helpful for people because we're not trying to pull the wool over their eyes. We're not trying to fool them by saying, hey, you shouldn't be that way. You shouldn't feel that way. There's no reason for this to be part of whatever. You were in the fog of war, or, it was an accident or whatever it is. Something happened. Accident or not, something happened, and you can have some responsibility. You can have some guilt, maybe even some, if it's values-based, maybe even some values-based shame. Now, what we can also do is we can say, who else has guilt? Who else owns this, right? If you had an accident, yes, it could be your fault, but it's not 100% your fault. There's other pieces to the whole process that you can take slivers of, like a pie chart, and give it to somebody else, right? Yeah, well, maybe you should have been paying attention a little bit more when you were coming up towards that light or that stop sign, whatever it might be, and you went across and you got hit, right? But was it only your fault that you got hit? Because there's somebody else driving the other car. I mean, could they have not have seen you? Maybe, but they have some responsibility. I mean, it's like a little bit. They still have some responsibility, right? And then you can keep going back and around. Like, what other responsibility can we hand out? Um, the civil engineering, for example, like, why is this light the way it is? Why is the stop sign the way it is? So I'm, reaching on some level going over this, but the idea is to spread the guilt out, right? Not saying that you are not guilty of something, but to be able to find those things that you can um, bring in that are true, that you can spread it out, right? A lot of veteran piece, right? A lot of veterans will blame themselves during ambushes or something along those lines, right? Like, I should have seen these people, should have shot these people, I should have done this X, Y, or Z. A gunner, for example, and some of these are actual things that I've heard in the process of doing work. But a gunner, for example, might feel bad at an ambush because people passed away and they should have been able to protect their people more, their men, their team more, women as well. So in that context, you okay, have some guilt, right? There's something there. Like, you didn't see these assailants, you didn't shoot them. But the other thing is true too, and you can ask this question: how much fault does the assailant have? How much fault do the people that ambushed you have? Right? If you're going to take 100%, it's your fault that you got ambushed because, and people died because you didn't do X, Y, or Z. Well, I mean, if those people weren't there shooting at you, would we be having this conversation? Right? So usually, all of a sudden, the pie, like the pie graph, all of a sudden the pie, all of a sudden shifts pretty big, right? And then you can also start doing other stuff. Why were you on that road? Right? Who chose that road? You know, um, did they do an appropriate risk matrix or whatever? Did they do that? Did they give you enough rest before? There's all these little pieces that you can go at different levels going up as well, right? Because it's not just who chose that road, but why are you there specifically in that area? Who chose that area for you, right? So again, you can keep going, and eventually, if you really want to get to it, you can even go back to the American people who decided that we're going to support this war or something on those lines. It's limited at that point, but it's still part of the blame process. The American people can have a little sliver of responsibility for you being where you are. Okay. And that helps so much for a lot of people to recognize that I don't have to carry it all myself. All right. So that was my little tidbit for guilt today. Again, it's one of the subjects that I like to work with. When I do trainings, it's funny because we talk on the last day of trainings, often on the second weekend, we end up getting into other populations and other issues, and it's it's kind of funny because when they come up, like, oh, I love working with, with this subject, because I do. I love working with grief and loss. There's some amazing work that happens there, um, and when you have somebody that lost somebody. End up having a positive experience, right? You and you were there for it. That can be uplifting. It can be like, hey, this is why I do this work. Um, and so I like to work with behavioral addictions. I plug Miller's feeling state protocol often because that's the one I generally use for that type of work. But again, same thing. These people are trapped under their own addictions, their own compulsions, their own impulse control issues, and we're able to help bring them out of it in some way, shape, or form. And you know how awesome that is, right? And so oftentimes when I have a new client and they're hopeless, I say I have said, I have some hope for you, and I'm going to hold that hope for you until you can have it and hold it yourself. All right, everybody, and with that, I want to thank you all for coming, and I want to let you know that I'm interested in your questions, and if you want to be on here, just let me know, and we can bring you on. We'll have to talk about what you plan to explore, but yeah, we're definitely willing to have guests as we move forward. So this is Tim Vermillion, and this has been another episode of EMDR Live Desk. EMDR News Live Desk, and we'll be here on Monday at 9:30. So any questions, feel free to write them in. Thank you, and have a great day.